This coming out is a huge deal. Monster Rancher 1 and 2 is a compilation game that contains the original Monster Rancher as well as its sequel Monster Rancher 2. They were released on December 8th, 2021 on Steam, with the Switch and iOS ports coming out a day after. I'll tackle the original game first. I think going over my point of view is a little important here. I never got to play Monster Rancher 1 in English before. I made a Japanese Switch account to play the Japanese version. I knew how to battle, but I knew nothing else that went on around me. Monster Rancher starts out by having the player ace the breeder's exam. For doing so, the player is given an assistant named Holly. Holly will then run into her training teacher, Teska. She'll tell the player that he has trained a monster that made it all the way to S rank, as well as being the 4 major tournaments. That really is all the story you need to know, because now we get to go to the town and obtain a monster. Now, there are 2 methods to obtaining a monster. The first one is go to the market, which to my knowledge doesn't change. The 3 monsters here are Dino, Tiger, and Suezo. The Shrine is an exciting one. You see, back in the day, you could pop in music CDs, other PS1 games, I believe even DVDs into your PS1, PS2, and PS3. After letting the game load a bit, a monster would be, in quotes, generated from the CD. Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX released on Switch and mobile, so you can imagine that this is no longer the case. These releases have a database where one can enter an artist, album, or song name. It isn't limited to just music either. I tried Pikmin 3 Deluxe and actually got something. Oh yeah, the market can also take the monster off your hands. I want to quickly cover the other things that one can do in the town before moving on to the ranch. The lab is really the last major place that the player can go. Here they can do 4 things. The first one is combine, which will allow the player to combine 2 monsters that they already have to create a new one. It may inherit moves, and the stats will be higher if the new monster comes from, let's say, stronger parents. Freeze will allow the player to store their current monster and allow them to obtain a new one. Revive will allow the player to take a monster out of storage and bring them back to the ranch. Lastly, delete will get rid of a monster forever. That's pretty brutal. One can also go to data, which will show their monster's current stats, the breeder's achievements, and the monsters that they have unlocked. But this can be done at the ranch too. I personally think that the database is a decent replacement. I'll talk more about it in a bit. My brother told me to try Pink Floyd's The Wall, hoping that we would get a mono. Instead, I got a weird Suezo that goes by the name of Planet. I fell in love with it and determined that this would be my first monster. So now we head back to the ranch. The first thing that pops up are 3 different types of food: potato, fish, and meat. Basically, most monsters hate potatoes, fish is the middleman, and most monsters love meat. The prices for these foods are 10G, 100G, and 300G respectively, and your monster will be fed on the first week of every month. If you have the money, I'd say go with meat. It can increase the monster's lifespan apparently. On the ranch, you will be mostly raising your monster stats through work, which takes up to a week each. The 6 main stats are life, which will determine how much HP your monster has. Power, this will determine how much physical attacks will do, which will be noted by yellow attacks. It also helps determine how much damage your monster will receive from physical attacks. Defense, this will help your monster take less damage if the value is high. Skill, this will increase your monster's hit percentages. Speed, this will decrease your opponent's hit percentages. Lastly, intelligence will increase the amount of damage that your monster does with green attacks. Likewise with power, it will also play a part in calculating how much damage your monster will take from enemy intelligence attacks. As I said before, these will be raised by doing work, which will take a week each. These are displayed as cute little 2D sprites. Aren't they just adorable? Since the monster is doing work for someone else, a little bit of money will be earned for doing these. The light training sessions will net the player 100G and will increase the monster's fatigue and stress slightly. The light training sessions are Cart, which will increase power, Hunt, which will increase skill, Forest, which will increase speed, Field, which will increase intelligence, Guard will increase defense, and Logging will increase life. However, there are 4 hard training sessions that will increase fatigue and stress by way more than the light training sessions, but the stat gains will be greater. The breeder will also gain 150G from the training sessions. Circus will increase speed greatly, slightly increase intelligence, and lower power. Build will increase power greatly, life slightly while lowering speed. Mine will greatly increase life, slightly increase defense while lowering skill. Last but not least, Mailman will increase intelligence greatly, skill slightly while lowering defense. If you don't want to cram items down your monster's throat, then it's very wise to let the monster rest every so often too. This will help keep both stress and fatigue down, helping your monster live longer. Another thing that one can do is send a monster out on a training mission. Training is super important to Monster Rancher because this is how they learn techniques. A lot of monster training techniques are kind of ass, so you're gonna have to branch out eventually. Some techniques are easy to learn, your monster stats are high enough, or they use a different move a certain amount of times. It's kind of like a chain thing. This will involve sending your monster out for a month and they'll get pretty solid stat gains. But let's be real here, you're in it for the technique. If you're really in it for the stats, just do some heavy training instead. There are 6 training locations total, 1 for each stat. Like the work sessions, these will be displayed in cute 2D sprites. Aren't they just adorable? These cost 2,000 Gs normally, but sometimes a discount will come in the mail at the beginning of the month that will slash that price in half for the entire month. Before I get to the techniques in battling, I want to at least touch on expeditions because that's the last thing that you can send your monster out on. There are 3 chances to go on an expedition. To unlock these, your monster will need high fame. High power, high intelligence, and high skill stats will also be needed because these high stats help your monster move obstacles and find items. I personally didn't dabble in these too much because I thought that they were much more polished in the sequel. These are needed to unlock certain monsters, like the damn hanger, which requirements are so damn stupid I'm not going to cover it here. If you want to know, I'll link Mr. Moosebone's video because he's a goddamn legend. There are so many items that the player can use in the game. When on the ranch, they can go to the store at near any time. Every once in a while, they will receive an ad that the store is having a sale for a week. Some items can only be found on expeditions, and others can only be obtained by winning tournaments. The main 2 items that I roll are the taffy, which lowers fatigue, and the mint leaf, which lowers stress. These are probably the best 2 items in the game. Other items include CD chips that will give stat gains when combining, special combining items that will give a certain monster, golden peaches to increase a monster's life, vitamins that can increase a monster's stat at the cost of their life, treats to increase your monster's happiness, such as the apple cake and candies, as well as passive items that the player can hold on to lower fatigue and stress. Multiple items can be used on a monster each week. One needs to be careful taking care of their monster. If they get too careless, the monster can get injured, run away, lose lifespan, and eventually die. The breeder will also get prompts to scold or praise their monster, and each has its own consequences. Each monster has its own lifespan, which depends on the main breed and the subbreed of the monster. A monster will go through numerous stages of their life, having stages such as the baby stage, a prime stage, an elder stage. Some monsters are late bloomers, some get into their prime stage early. Why is there so much to this? During a monster's prime stage, you'll get the maximum stat gains during training sessions. While you'll notice that a monster leaves its prime stage, the stat gains will decrease significantly. Eventually, it gets to the point where it doesn't feel like it's beneficial to train with them anymore. You may as well just battle with your older monsters to get money, or freeze them so you can combine with them later. I've held off on this for long enough. Let's get into the battling. Monsters will build up will over time. This isn't tied to one of the 6 main stats. It is quite literally a stat that is dependent on both the main breed and subbreed of your monster. In order to use attacks, your monster will have to consume their will. There are 4 rectangles on the bottom of the screen that represent attacks that your monsters can use. There are close range attacks, mid-range attacks, far range attacks, and the farthest range attacks. The monsters can only use that specific move if they are that distance away from the opponent. When the monster gets too close, a double punching glove symbol will appear. This will shoot the opposing monster away from the one that used it. This push doesn't do any damage, but it can be very nice for positioning. Let's look at Roger Waters for a second, shall we? In the closest range rectangle is a picture of a tail. This move is Tail Assault that can only be used if Roger Waters is right up in the enemy's business. The mid-range section is a spitting icon, which is the move Spit. When Roger Waters is in the zone, he could use Spit, but not Tail Assault. Eventually, Roger Waters learned Telekinesis, which is the icon in the far middle slot. Finally, Roger Waters learned I-Beam, which is in the far spot and can only be used if he is at a great distance away from the opponent. I'm sure you noticed in my clips that Tail Assault and Spit get covered by Kiss and Lick respectively. Moves can be swapped during a battle, so if a monster has 2 situational moves in a single slot, feel free to just swap between them mid-match to whatever one is better in the situation. I mostly kept them on green attacks because Roger Waters had an intelligence build. There are a few things to keep in mind when looking at text. The first one is position, and I've explained that in decent detail. Another very important thing to look at is how much will a technique consumes. Some climb up into the 50s. Usually a better technique will require more will. Makes sense? The duration of an attack matters a lot too because the opponent will still gain will throughout the entire duration of that attack. You see, will matters a lot because the more will a monster has, the more damage it will do, the less damage it will take, the more it will dodge, and the more it will hit. Yes, the best strat is to build up 99 will and then fire away. This doesn't make longer attacks necessarily useless though, as there may be situations where one wants to run out that clock. You know, get that timer to 0 if you're in the lead or something. The other things to pay attention to are much easier because they are rated on a scale of E to S. S means that the move is great in that particular stat, meanwhile E means that it is pure ass in that aspect. Force will determine how much damage a move does if it hits. Hit percentage will determine how likely it is to hit the opponent. The withering will determine how much will your opponent will lose if they get hit. Sharpness will determine how likely a critical hit is. Fame will also help your monster score critical hits more often. If your monster's loyalty is low, their attacks at the bottom will become question marks, and they will suffer from foolery. This shit is really annoying with a baby monster, and usually makes battling with them a goddamn nightmare, if one doesn't have like at least 50 or so loyalty. Just a couple more things to touch on before we're done with battling. If you can help it, do not ever have your monster do AI fights. AI-controlled monsters are stupid as shit and will use moves that you never would. Like intelligence builds, they'll just keep using power moves. It's so annoying. They also have a tendency to burn their will right away, which is just a horrible strategy. It should also be noted that each monster has its own field speed, and this will determine how fast they move on the field. High field speed can be very helpful if one has a good move in the far slot, or they're just trying to avoid in an opponent's strong slot. These aren't specifically stated anywhere in the game, so it's off to the Legend Cup. There are 13 starter monsters, which are dinos, golems, suezos, hares, tigers, gollies, monols, worms, nagas, gels, pixies, plants, and discs. These guys can be obtained from CDs, or I guess in this case, the database, right from the beginning of the game. There are 7 unlockable monsters: dragons, magics, apes, ghosts, hangers, doodles, and nayas. As I stated before, I'm not going to go that deep and talk about unlocking all of them, as that would make this video way too damn long. Just head on to the Legend Cup or Mr. Moosebone's channel, which again I will link. I would argue that the variety of these monsters is the best thing about the game. Some will act similar, but it's so much fun switching between specialized glass cannons, to walls that can take hits, to mixed attackers, or to all-rounded monsters. The designs themselves are badass, and the fact that there are numerous subbreeds for each monster also helps in the design aspect, as well as bloats the number of raisable monsters in the game. I got Roger Waters to S rank, and I defeated all the 4 major cups, with some resetting required. I then started to raise a disc because it is a monster that is not in the second game. I raised it a bit, but got annoyed by how bad it was. I did most of what I wanted to do, such as upgrade the house so I can hold more items, and upgrade the farm so I can raise bigger monsters, and I beat the 4 major cups. I decided to move on to the second game because that one was my childhood baby. I'm not done with Monster Rancher 1 DX, far from it. I want to revisit it someday and unlock all the monsters in it, specifically both the Magic and Doodle, because these monsters are not in Monster Rancher 2 DX. I put in roughly 10 hours or so before moving on to the sequel. I also want to quickly add that a game over is possible. If the player runs out of money, they will lose. It's pretty hard to do if one is not aiming for it, seeing how, doing work raises cash. But I thought it was worth a mention. That, for the most part, is Monster Rancher 1 DX. As I said in the opening, I didn't get to play this one in English too much back in the day. I started with Monster Rancher 2 back in the day. After playing this one, I can safely say that the second game is more or less the same, but to a much more polished degree. Don't get me wrong, there are more differences here than, say, a yearly sports title or a sister Pokemon game, but the overall feeling is super similar. Many will look at this package and jump right into the sequel. I get it, but I think the first game deserves its fair shot. It is also the easier game in several aspects. The sequel can get pretty brutal. Monster Rancher 2 starts off with the user completing a personality test. That does absolutely nothing. After completing it, they will be given an assistant by the name of Colt. Now it's off to the town, which gives off a very similar vibe that the town did in the first game. The options here are almost identical. It should also be noted that the market changes monsters, and this isn't static. Moji and Zoom are present all year round, while Suezo will be there during the spring, Arrowhead will be there during the summer, in the fall, Hare will be there, and lastly, Gaboo will be there during winter. One can now sell their monsters as well, but the prices really aren't worth it. The rarer and higher ranked the monster is, the more money one will earn, but I'd rather just keep older monsters to combine them. There's also the job option now, which is very neat from a preservation perspective. You see, Sony released the Pocket Station in Japan. It sold okay in the region from what I've found, but Sony didn't release it worldwide. The original Monster Farm 2 was compatible with it and unlocked these jobs. Basically, you can earn money by picking up, down, left, or right. This minigame can be accessed from the main menu, and it will show 2 numbers. If the numbers equal 10, you pick up. If the numbers are equal to each other, pick down. Pick left if the number on the left is higher in value than the right number, but they don't add up to 10. Then pick the right number if, that condition is flipped. I didn't play this more than a couple rounds, but I enjoy when obscure features get revived, especially when they require an additional accessory that's sold poorly. I always think of stuff like the e-reader for the GameCube. I like weird, obscure stuff like that. Monsters don't do work for others in this game. They actually do training sessions. This comes with the downside of not earning cash. These will be done in 3D this time, which is neat. Domino raises offense, Shoot raises skill, Study raises intelligence, Dodge raises speed, Run raises life, and Endure raises defense. Likewise, to the first game, hard trainings also exist that will have better stat gains at the cost of more fatigue and stress with 4 in tow. Pulse sharply raises offense, slightly raises life and lowers speed. Leap will increase speed greatly, intelligence slightly, and reduce power. Meditate will increase intelligence greatly, skill lightly, and lower defense. And lastly, Swim will greatly increase defense, slightly increase life, and lower intelligence. There isn't simply just success and failure for training sessions now, as 2 new conditions are added. One of the ones added is great, and this will increase your monster stat more than a usual success would. There's also a cute animation beside it. For example, in the shooting challenge, a great animation will have the monster using only 1 stone to hit all 3 targets. There's also a cheat, where it will show a monster half-assing the drill, and the monster will earn less stats than usual. For example, in the life training, my douchebag dragon decided to cut the corners. He still gained some life, but not too much. The training sessions will have 1, 2, or 3-star rating next to them. I don't know if this actually changes how much gains your monster gets, or it's just purely aesthetic. It's nice seeing the attention to detail though. One example is a domino drill that goes from wood dominoes to stone dominoes to some dark black dominoes. The Errantries are basically what training was in the previous game, with some differences. Likewise with the drills in the game, these are now fully displayed in 3D and not just 2D sprites. Not just that, but every week of the month is now a different drill too. Like the Speed Errantry will have the monster run up a snowy slope on week 1. It will also have the monster dodge icicles on week 2. On week 3, it will have the monster run across ice that is collapsing underneath its feet. On the final week, the monster will have to face off against polar bears. There's also a chance the monster could run into a wild monster, of varying strength. These battles are done AI versus AI because the tamer isn't presently available, so good luck winning the harder ones. There are 5 training places total. All Errantry sessions will give the monster some life stat gain, so life doesn't get a unique place of its own, but all the other stats do. These are needed to unlock certain monsters, such as the Zilla or the Centaur. Battling is a bit different in Monster Rancher 2. First thing is first, Will was renamed to Guts. They are effectively the same thing, but they are just renamed. They nerfed the ever-loving shit out of defense. In the first game, it was a pretty decent stat, but that in turn made the metagame kind of boring. The meta in the original Monster Rancher was to use withering attacks and prevent your opponent from attacking. This was because it was actually very difficult to knock out an opponent if they had a high defense stat. That's why for my playthrough, I usually focus on glass cannons, like Kato or Suezo. It should also be noted that there are several battle specials. These are present in Monster Rancher 1 as my Suezo got Fury at some point during the game, but they are much more prominent in the sequel. Let's go over at least a couple of them. Anger can happen when a monster has its guts withered. It will double the monster's withering and it will regain guts faster, but dodge less. Ease may trigger when a monster successfully dodges and or attacks 5 times in a row successfully. They will dodge attacks easier and use fewer guts to attack. Power may trigger when an attack brings the monster 30% or less of its life. They will double damage. Hurry will trigger when 10 seconds are left on the battle timer and they have less life. The monster will have double the chance to land a critical hit. Some, such as Real and Unity, are unique to specific monsters. They are unique to Joker and Color Pandora respectively, and some of them, such as Power and Anger, require the monster to be a good nature and bad nature respectively. Once again, I have to ask, why is there so much to this? It should also be noted that the monsters gain some stats after completing tournaments now. The S-rank ones can fetch decent stat gains, especially late in a monster's life. You gotta love grit too. You know, when you knock an opposing monster out and they get up at 1 health and then decide to just flip the match and knock you out. It's fun, right? A couple of other things are worth mentioning. The player's monster will have a form. They can be fat, normal, or skinny. Fat monsters will dodge less, but will take less damage from attacks. Skinny monsters will dodge more attacks, but will take more damage. Items return in all their glory. But like everything else in Monster Rancher 2, there are a lot of items and they are more fleshed out than the original. Holly also appears in the I'm a Fiend tournament, which is an amazing callback of one who's played the original. The player also collects cards for all the monsters that they've obtained. This adds a fun collectathon challenge to the mix. Expeditions also return, but they are more fleshed out and are needed to unlock many monster species. Also, don't worry, Suki Suezo is still available in the game by trying Monster Rancher by Tecmo in the database. This guy has insane stats, but dies in 1 week for those that don't know. Just a pro tip too, there is also more food in this game. Potatoes, fish, and meat all return. However, there are 3 new ones. Milk, which is good for baby monsters, cup jelly, which can be used to unlock Duckin', and tablets, which are simply the best food. If you have money, you need to spend them on tablets, because this will help reduce stress, which will in turn can help your monster gain life. Honestly, the place where Monster Rancher 2 shines over the original the most, at least in my opinion, are the fact that there are now 38 main species of monsters to raise. That means it is almost doubles the first game of 20 main species. The player will start off with these monsters available: Ape, Arrowhead, Color Pandora, Gaboo, Gel, Hare, Hopper, Kato, Mochi, Mono, Naga, Pixie, Plant, Suezo, Tiger, and Zoom. This means that Baku, Golem, Biarl, Beaklon, Centaur, Dragon, Duckin, Durhan, Golly, Hanger, Mew, Worm, Ghost, Jill, Joker, Metalner, Mach, Niton, Udine, Phoenix, Raki, and Zilla all need to be unlocked. Some of these conditions are just absolutely ludicrous. Do you want to hear the worst one? To get Beaklon, First, you need to unlock the Worm, which is simply done by entering the Amphibia tournament with at least a D rank monster. Then you need to meet all of these conditions. The Worm must be in C rank or lower, the Worm must be at least 4 years old, but less than 5. The Worm must have at least 80 loyalty. The Worm must have been fed 30 or more cup jellies. The Worm must have 0 fatigue and 7 or less stress on June 4th. Who would ever meet all those conditions without the internet or data mining? That is just goddamn absurd. As I said with the original Monster Rancher, I'm not going to go over how to unlock all of these monsters, as this video is already way too damn long. I just want to throw down how absurd unlocking Beaklon is, because it's also pretty funny. To wrap up Monster Rancher 2, I want to say that I am competent enough in the game to get a few monsters all the way to the Hall of Fame. This was not on the first Monster Rancher. After beating all of the Major 4 tournaments, the player was just kind of done with that monster. After beating the Major 4 tournaments with a monster in Monster Rancher 2, that monster will be invited to a one-on-one match against either a white Mochi named Most on even-numbered years, or a white Suezo named Poritoka on odd-numbered years. Up to 3 monsters can be displayed, and they will be posed after which technique they use the most. I'm not a god at the game, nor am I taking part in the competitive scene or anything, but at least I'm not a total noob. I've been playing this game on and off for 2 decades after all. Likewise with the first game, a game over can happen by running out of money. I would say that it is much more likely to happen to new players during this game because training doesn't net them money. It is still pretty hard to trigger, as you can always skimp out and feed your monster potatoes and beat up on the E-rank creatures. Oakley Man deserves it after all. Well, one thing should be said. These aren't actually based on Monster Rancher 1 and 2. These are translations of Monster Farm 1 and 2. A casual fan won't really notice the difference here, but some monsters in certain tournaments were replaced when Tecmo was developing Monster Rancher 2. So those original monsters that were in Monster Farm 2 will return. The big one is the fact, though, that all monsters' lifespans are decreased by 100 weeks from the Monster Rancher 1 and 2 that we got here in the West. This will sting for newer players, as now every mistake will seem even more fatal. If one cares enough, I will actually link an article that has 50 changes between the original Monster Rancher 2 and this new port. There were some changes made to Monster Rancher 1 as well. So what makes this package DX exactly? Personally, I think the fast forward feature, or FF as the game calls it, is the single greatest thing about this game. I've long thought the fact that if older games are getting re-released, especially when it gets grindy at times, this needs to be implemented, period. It will make the game go twice as fast, which is a lifesaver for training, errantries, simple battles, and at times, long-winded character dialogue and cutscenes. Yes, you could argue that if you emulate these games, you can go up to 8 times the speed or whatever, but it's still nice to see an official release support a feature like this. Speaking of errantry, those monsters that you fight at the end, once you come into contact with them, you unlock them. You don't even need to win the fight. That's right, that cool-ass burning wall, you can raise one. What about Zilla King? Yep, you can raise that too. Or what about Magma Heart? Of course you can. This also applies to the 2 final bosses, the white Suezo and the white Mochi. I remember running into these monsters like Magma Heart back in the day and thought to myself, it'd be so cool if I could raise that bad boy. He just looks so cool. I'm very happy that they made that change. I've raised dozens of Suezos by this point because it's my favorite monster, but I can't wait to give that awesome white Suezo a try. Some smaller things include new musical arrangements for Monster Rancher 2. I'll actually go against the grain and say that these aren't too bad. I know a lot of longtime fans despise these new arrangements. I played with them the first few hours and kind of enjoyed it, but I won't lie to you, when I switched back to the original tracks, I stayed there. They're just simply better in my opinion. There are now 20 free slots instead of 10, which I think is a lifesaver actually. It makes it more enticing to keep monsters frozen and mess around in the dish shrine. Speaking of which, as I said long ago in this video, I think that the database replacement for the CD swapping is actually a decent replacement. I know a lot of people disagree and that they say the magic is simply lost. I get it to a degree, but I simply don't agree with that. My favorite album ever, just all time, is Wildflowers by Tom Petty. I was eagerly awaiting to see what monster I could give him an album because, again, it's my single favorite album of all time. Just going through some of my other favorite musical artists like Billy Joel, Billy Currington, and The Police made me excited each time. There is also a random feature that is just so much fun to spam and see all the dumb shit that you can obtain. I love getting the CDs out back in the day, but it's honestly kind of cumbersome and annoying. The Legend Cup also has, in quotes, figured out the database. So say you want a purebred model to unlock the damn doodle in Monster Rancher 1 DX. You can head to the Legend Cup and look up purebred model and pick that CD. I waited to get the doodle until after this video because it was annoying trying to get a purebred model without knowing that the Legend Cup has figured out the database entries. There's also a new training record feature, which is definitely pretty nice. It will show what the monster has done for roughly the past 2 months. This can be helpful if you're trying the no rest method and you forget which week you're doing, light training, hard training, so it's nice to have. 27 new monsters have been added, including monsters originally exclusive to the Japanese and English versions of the games. One can connect online to fight opponents with similar stat totals. It's fun just messing around with this. The opponent will be AI controlled, so I'll usually just send in my AI controlled monster out there and get mad when it does stupid attacks. This works for both games in the package, and Koei Tecmo will hold tournaments from time to time. There are other changes from back in the day, such as AI-controlled monsters now being able to attack with less than 45 guts, but more casual players won't really notice them. At least in my opinion, there really is a decent bit here to persuade people who have played these games before to pick them up now. The new monsters are exciting, the fast forward feature now makes playing the game normal speed seem glacially slow, the new database feature is fun to mess around in, the additional free slots makes hoarding creatures less cumbersome, the training log is a helpful little extra, and above all else, a new generation of players can experience these games while supporting the franchise. The 3 platforms that it's on are Switch, the App Store, and of course Steam. These are all huge platforms with tons of active players. I really hope that this comes to Xbox and PlayStation because it needs all the exposure that it can get. But now we get to some negatives of this package. A majority of my time has been spent on Steam, but at times it really doesn't feel like it. When you load up the game, it literally says tap to start. This is straight up a mobile port that's chucked on the Steam to make a quick buck. The weird mobile buttons are on the side. It keeps the original aspect ratio and it only goes to 720p. And I've had a couple of crashes during my play. The UI and controls really seem unintuitive at times too. I tried with both keyboard and mouse as well as a controller, and I personally thought that playing with a controller was much better. You can change key bindings, and it is pretty nice moving around the mouse and choosing options with only the mouse, but I just thought that it was awkward fighting with the mouse and keyboard for whatever reason. It also needs to be said because I was playing on Steam, but really Tecmo, no achievements, no trading cards, no point shop items. It'd be so much fun spamming Suezo icons for my friends that play this game. What a missed opportunity. The only other negative that I have is the fact that there is still so much of the game that the game doesn't even try to explain to the player. On one hand, it is kind of refreshing that a game literally says, figure it out. So many of today's games just tell the player what to do, where to go. It almost gets to the point where it feels like the game just holds the player's hand from start to finish. There is a fine line between not knowing anything and the game doing too much. And I'd argue that this game is guilty of the former. How the hell is one supposed to know how to unlock Beaklon without the internet? Who in their right mind would try to meet all those conditions without some sort of clue? Or how about the hanger in the first game? Or even Duckin in the sequel? Is it necessary to have to make a doll first, then find glue on Expedition, then build another goddamn doll? These games have online manuals, but they don't really help with the nitty-gritty details, although they could definitely help with some things. I'd be less bothered if these things happen naturally, over time, and to be fair, some of them do, such as Melner and Mach, but some of these you'll never find out on your own. I guess it's less of a deal because the internet exists, but I think it's important to note this for the casuals. You can enjoy the game without all this additional stuff, but they'll be missing out on some of the game's content and monsters, and at points, these games will be straight up frustrating for them. The last big negative that I'm going to give this package is the thing that held back the original games in my opinion. There's simply way too much RNG involved. Every single attack that you and your opponent send out has a unique accuracy value. There will be times when you use 90% accuracy moves, miss with them, then get KO'd by 20% attacks. There will be times when you meet expedition conditions for the item that you want, whether it be a golden peach or a combo item, just for them not to spawn in. Whether your monster succeeds or fails a drill, that's just random. Yeah, fatigue plays a factor in it, sure, but there is some RNG going on in there. Your monster could fail a drill just for you to reset the game, not change anything, do the drill again, then suddenly they might succeed. Or how about going on an ranchery and not learning a move? That had happened to me dozens of times. Trust me, you'll reset the game literally hundreds of times throughout your time with the game, you played a decent amount, and you're serious about it and want to get the most out of your monster's life. These negatives don't even compare with all the positives that this compilation brings to the table. Above all else, these games are wholly unique. There really aren't any other games that provide this gameplay loop. I know monster simulation games are getting kinda big in the indie scene, but it's nice to see the king come back. There is also more than enough content here to keep those who get sucked into it literally hundreds of hours of entertainment, especially if they give the first game a go. The problem with the sequel being included is that a lot of people are just gonna hop right into the sequel, but the first game can still suck you in if you give it the chance. Yes, these are old games, but for $30, over 100 hours of entertainment is fine by me. Try looking up the price of these games for PS1. It's madness! Yes, you could argue that one could strip ROMs from the internet and emulate them, but they'll be missing the DX content and not support the franchise this way. Not to mention, I heard that the CD generation is a huge hassle when emulating, and that really is part of the magic. I think the single greatest thing about this compilation coming out is the fact that, well, it actually happened. Monster Rancher might have been a big deal back in the day. Both 1 and 2 sold over 1 million units each, but nowadays it's super niche. Apparently Tecmo only agreed to release it worldwide because people on Twitter were basically begging them to. There really was a high chance of this not leaving Japan, because Monster Farm is still a decently big deal over there. At least the Switch ports sold well over there, but looking at Steam Spy and the eShop charts, it doesn't look like it's selling too great over here. I hope Tecmo kept their expectations low and that this package managed to hit them. So that, more or less, is Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. This compilation has given me the excuse to try out the original Monster Rancher game without spending an arm and a leg for it. It also gave me a great excuse to get back into one of my favorite childhood games with Monster Rancher 2 included. These original games still have some issues, like pacing and being too RNG dependent, as well as the port having weird issues like controls and occasional crashes, but that's not going to stop me from putting hundreds of hours into this package when all said is done. After nearly 40 hours in, it feels like I've just scratched the surface of both games. I still need to revisit the first game and raise that damn doodle. If these ports were a bit better executed, i.e. not goddamn mobile ports, maybe I could go with a full 7. I usually grade ports a bit harder because it's not quite as exciting or, not as much effort as a brand new product. I'm gonna go with a 6 out of 7 for Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX. I hope this does well enough that Tecmo would contemplate bringing over Monster Rancher 3 and 4, as I haven't gotten to play those.